Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Sir Jon Pertwee's portrayal of the Third Doctor is well beloved among fans. He might not be as popular as Tom Baker's 4th or David Tennant's 10th Doctors, but his era is still frequently praised for successfully reinventing the show with a brilliant unit Earthbound format that the majority of it follows. And I think it's fair to say that at least part of that success is thanks to Pertwee's performance. It was his Doctor that was the first to truly embody what we've come to expect from the character ever since. He had a fierce moral and political sense of right and wrong. He was the first to extensively use the sonic screwdriver throughout the whole of his era, and even something as simple as making a big, heroic and dramatic point in saying, "I'm the Doctor." Pertwee redefines the part into something more like an action hero, almost like James Bond. This is not to say, of course, that neither of his two predecessors had a strong moral fibre or used a sonic screwdriver. Both of them had the former in a much smaller aspect, and the Second Doctor used the latter a limited amount of times. But hopefully you get what I mean. One could potentially argue that just as William Hartnell was instrumental in establishing the role, and Patrick Troughton was in setting the template for how regeneration worked and could change the character, Jon Pertwee had a similarly important role of redefining it in a way that was simultaneously honouring what his two predecessors did, and also completely reshaping it in his own way. So bearing all of that in mind, speculating on what would have happened if the Third Doctor had been played by someone else is really fascinating. Obviously, Ron Moody was the first choice for the part and was even asked if he'd be interested in playing it, but he turned it down and later regretted doing so. But it's not him that I wish to focus on for this particular video. Instead, I'm going to focus on a couple of actors that, whilst they were never actually considered for the role, I personally would have been really curious to see what they would have done with it. These are, of course, Gerald Harper of Adam Adamant and Hadley fame, and Adam West, the campy 1960s Batman actor himself. So, what if things had gone differently? What if Gerald Harper or Adam West were the Third Doctor? Now, you're probably wondering, why have I gone with these two actors in particular? Well, let's get that out of the way with first. Basically, with Adam West, you can blame my friend BillyBob for that. One day, he did these edits of him as the Third Doctor and sent them to me on Discord, or shared them in my Discord server, I can't remember which exactly. And I instantly fell in love with the idea. So much so that not only did it become a sort of running joke between us and other members of the server, but also I ended up wanting to do it as an actual video. I think it appealed to me so much because I have such fond memories of watching the 60s Batman series with my late granddad when I was a kid. And so naturally, I'm going to like anything that ties it in with Doctor Who. I've even ended up re-watching a few of its episodes as a result of all of this. As for Gerald Harper, well, it's because not too long ago I watched all of the surviving episodes of Adam Adamant Lives. For those of you who may not know, this was a BBC TV show in the late 60s that focused on a Victorian adventurer being frozen in a block of ice until he's revived in 60s London. He then goes on a bunch of adventures fighting various villains alongside his sidekick Georgina Jones and his butler Sims. The whole series examines cultural attitudes of the 1960s and how different they are to what Adamant is used to from the late 19th to early 20th centuries. I really loved watching it, and it had this wonderfully campy tone to it. There are a bunch of Doctor Who connections to it, as not only did Second Doctor Patrick Troughton make an appearance in one of the episodes as a general, but it was also produced by none other than Verity Lambert, who was obviously Who's very first producer a couple of years earlier. It reunited her with Sydney Newman, another important figure in Doctor Who's early years of development. And I could just keep going on and on about all the connections, to be honest. Whilst Adam Adamant had ended in 1967, a few years before the Third Doctor's era started on Doctor Who, Harper's portrayal of Adamant has often been speculated to have helped form Pertwee's Third Doctor. Not only did they dress somewhat similarly to each other, but they were also both very much action-oriented heroes, with quite a few scenes of them getting into brawls with villains and henchmen, albeit in slightly different ways and tones. So yeah, hopefully that all helps everything make more sense to you all, and explain why I chose Harper and West in particular. As we've just discussed Gerald Harper and Adam Adamant, I'm going to discuss what he would have been like as the Third Doctor first. Both Harper and West were considerably younger than Jon Pertwee was in 1970. For context, by the end of the year, Harper was 39, West was 42, and Pertwee was 51. So they both bring a much more youthful vibe to the part. But beyond that, I think Harper's take on it will be fairly similar to Pertwee's, especially with the action heroics as we've already discussed. And would still have that veneer of being an old-fashioned, well-spoken gentleman, just done in Harper's more kind of over-the-top, theatrical way, and probably with that wry smile he often had in Adam Adamant. Harper might be cast after Peter Bryant and Derek Sherwin saw him in Adam Adamant, and thought that, with maybe a small amount of tweaking, he'd fit their plans for the Third Doctor's era fairly well. There is one slight problem with having Harper as the Third Doctor though, and that is that from 1969 to 1976, he played the titular main role in the ITV drama series Hadley. So the BBC and ITV, or rather Yorkshire Television, as this was still in the days that ITV was split into different regional networks of course, would need to come to some kind of production agreement with each other, in order for Harper to film Doctor Who for a few months, and then Hadley later on in the year, or vice versa. I don't know how likely it is that they will come to such an agreement back then, but we'll just say that they did, for the sake of the Harper as free scenario. But even with all of that, I bet Harper might get a bit tired of starring in both shows after a few years. So he might leave sooner than Jon Pertwee did in real life. Maybe he leaves at the end of season 10 in 1973 with the Green Death as his final story. If this was indeed the case, then maybe the Doctor has to regenerate after his final battle with Boss affects him more than he realised. And it might make sense to have Jo stay on for a little bit longer, as having both the Doctor and companion leave the show in just a few minutes might be a bit too much. Her romance with Cliff could potentially stick around though, although I think this is probably very unlikely really. She might leave at the end of Invasion of the Dinosaurs instead, perhaps having fallen in with the wrong crowd with Operation Golden Age like Mike Yates did, potentially even taking his place in this story. As in, she looks at it all from a very idealistic point of view. And just like with Yates, she isn't necessarily portrayed as having become a villain, just someone who had noble intentions, but didn't quite judge Professor Whittaker's motives correctly. To succeed Gerald Harper, we could either keep Tom Baker and just have his era start a year earlier, or we could go with someone else, such as either Graham Crowden, Bernard Cribbins, or Brian Blessed perhaps. Whoever would provide the best contrast to Harper's Third Doctor basically. Another potential exit I could have gone with would be to have Harper's Doctor regenerate at the start of Planet of the Daleks, just after he sent a message to the Time Lords and due to his injuries at the end of Frontier in Space. Although I think I prefer the Green Death option personally. But anyway, moving on to Adam West now. What would he be like as the Third Doctor? Well, I think he'd be a lot more different to Pertwee than Harper. Whilst I'm sure his Doctor would still be seen fighting various goons and villains over his tenure, he wouldn't be the suave dandy that Pertwee's portrayal was, or the gentleman adventurer that Harper's might have been. He'd be a much quieter, almost philosophical kind of incarnation instead. He'd be more likely to quietly amuse to himself about something. Maybe he would adopt this approach for scenes such as when he sees the Silurian base being blown up on the Brigadier's orders. He'd have this cool and collected surface, which would mask a much more passionate and fiery moral outrage underneath. I say this because in the Batman 66 TV series, West would often portray Bruce Wayne as having these types of moments. Like at the end of an episode, after he and Robin have defeated a villain together. And I think that's a part of West's performance that maybe gets a bit overlooked due to how silly and campy the show can be the rest of the time. I think that would be his third Doctor's defining traits, to be honest. He wouldn't be passionately verbally sparring with government officials like Pertwee did, and maybe even Harper might still do in his own unique way. He'd just calmly disagree with them and stand up for his own sense of right and wrong, with maybe a small calculated comment here and there to gently disarm them and win the argument. He'd be a much softer and calmer moral crusader in essence. Adam West might be cast after Bryant and Sherwin saw his take on Batman when it was shown over here in the UK in the late 60s, which was surprisingly pretty close to when it was airing in the States. He might express a lot of reluctance as, like when he was asked about playing James Bond in real life, he might think that the Doctor should stay British. But perhaps the idea of him playing a more serious role so soon after his stint as the Caped Crusader had finished might eventually entice him, as well as some gentle encouragement from Bryant and Sherwin. He would obviously be the first American actor to ever play the role if he had indeed been cast. I know the very idea of an American Doctor is not always a popular one among fans, and I do sympathise with that sentiment myself to some extent, but I think West is an example of an American who could actually play the part, at least in my honest opinion. West might, like Harper, not stay on for the full 5 seasons that Jon Pertwee did in our timeline. I mean, it's not impossible of course, but maybe he only does up to the end of season 9, bowing out with the Time Monster as his final story. Not a great one to end on, but yeah. Maybe his Doctor has to regenerate after the Master shoots him as he makes a dash for his TARDIS, or just the whole final events of the story with Atlantis and Kronos just tire him out, leading to him regenerating into his next incarnation, either inside the TARDIS or back at Unit HQ. Again, we could just keep Tom Baker and have him succeed West, or we could go with another British actor such as Jim Dale or Fulton McKay perhaps. Or we could decide to continue having an American Doctor by having maybe Gene Wilder or Vincent Price succeed him, as they're both other American actors that I think could have actually played the part. I wouldn't really change any of the other main cast members of the Third Doctor's era for either Harper or West, as well I don't really see any need to, as each cast member would still work really well with either of them. So Caroline John is still Liz Shaw, Nicholas Courtney is the Brigadier, Katie Manning is still Jo Grant, etc. The Master would probably still be Roger Delgado for both of them as well, as he was literally who Barry Letts and Terrance Dicks had in mind when they first came up with the idea of the Master. Although I was very tempted to have either Cesar Romero or Frank Gorshin as the Master opposite Adam West's Doctor, just to have a funny Batman 66 reunion between them. As for costumes, I think Harper's will be very similar to Pertwee's, especially given how the Third Doctor's look might very well have been inspired by Adam Adamant, whilst West might be something else entirely. Maybe something like a tweed jacket with red velvet ascot, blue shirts, some brown trousers, and light brown shoes. So basically the kind of thing he wore when he was playing Bruce Wayne in Batman 66, although he might keep Pertwee's assortment of Inverness capes. And I think that's pretty much it for these scenarios really. In summary, I think that both Gerald Harper and Adam West would have kept some of the stuff that Jon Pertwee brought to the Third Doctor, so Harper would still be very much the man of action, although he'd have his own take on Venusian Akida I'm sure, and West would have kept the scientist part of the character, although again put his own more understated spin on it. He'd still have the gadgets though, if anything, he'd probably have even more of them than Jon Pertwee did, maybe even including a shark repellent. But Jon Pertwee and his take on the Doctor was very much one of a kind, so having anybody else as a Third Doctor would have brought something really different to the table, regardless of who it might have been. I know it's really unlikely that either Gerald Harper or Adam West would have ever even been considered for the Third Doctor, but I wanted to have a bit of fun and imagine how I think they could have each played the part anyway. This video is also dedicated to both of them. Gerald Harper sadly passed away just last month, and Adam West died about 8 years ago now, I believe, so I wanted to do this to pay tribute to them and their careers. and I hope I did a good job in trying to do so. But anyway, there's my take on what if Gerald Harper or Adam West were the third Doctor. What did you think? Do you like my take on it or not? And would you have done anything differently? Please let me know in the comments section below. Thanks for watching, I hope you liked it. Please don't forget to press that subscribe button below, as well as press the bell icon at the side of it, so that you'll stay notified of when all my new videos come out. And feel free to join my Discord server where we talk about everything from Doctor Who to what if scenarios, and just whatever you want really. You can find a link to it in a pinned comment below, and I shall see you all in another video. So, until next time, bye bye!